Hello, good evening and welcome to tonight's show. This is The Late Show. We do have a special show for you tonight. We do have some technical problems which we're dealing with, but nothing new for us at Revelation TV, especially when we've got something important. We're going to be discussing something that's quite current. There was a statement that was made by Sir David Attenborough today. Mankind could disappear altogether, almost. This is a stark warning at the Climate Change Summit, and it's in Poland, and tens of thousands of people took to the streets in Brussels to demand urgent action on the state of our world. Nearly 200 nations are involved in this event, and designed to build on the landmark of the 2015 Paris Climate Accord, which set a goal of limiting climate change to well below 2 degrees. Well, I just want to introduce Dr. Grady, first of all. I know we haven't got him in picture, but we do have a picture of him somewhere, but that's in the archives. But Dr. Grady, welcome to tonight's program live.
Well, thank you, sir. It is a pleasure to be with you. And after all, a picture of me might break your lens anyway.
No, that's a pretty good one. That's that's one that was taken in 2003, I think. No.
Okay. Well, I don't know about that, but it's been a while.
Yeah. We also had miscommunication today. We sent these notes to Grady because what I wanted to do is add credence to what Dr. Grady's been saying for years, in fact, about global warming. And just for a bit of an overview, Dr. Grady, we've got lots of video, lots of graphs, a lot of research has gone into this. So we want you to comment as we go through. But I want our viewers to be aware that, as you've said many times, there are many other scientists in the world who also believe the same as what you do. And maybe you just reiterate what that is before we go to our first clip.
Well, it's quite simple. Global warming is being sold to the public is a political agenda of the far left to try to get people to live a socialistic, communistic lifestyle. The fact of the matter is it's anti-science, it's anti-God, it's anti-Bible. It is simply a political agenda. When we take a look at the real science, what we see is that in real science, the Earth has been cooling slowly, gradually for the last 20 years. We are in a solar minimum at this very moment. That the Earth has been slowly warming and cooling for the last 125 years, approximately. We came out of the Little Ice Age about 1895, and we've had about 5 or 6 little ups and little downs. It is by no means catastrophic. It is by no means unexpected. It is natural cycles that are going on, those that are set in motion by God himself. There's nothing to be alarmed about, and humans are not capable of controlling the weather or impacting climate over a long-term basis.
Okay, let me just stop you there because we've got lots to get through tonight, Dr. Grady. Talking about the left, there's a clip that we're going to be showing you now, what the left gets wrong about climate change, and this is from the Daily Signal.
What the left gets wrong about climate change are, first of all, very numerous examples, but the first and most important one is this idea that all scientists agree, that there's a 97% climate consensus, that no one disagrees in the scientific community. And this is perhaps the most outrageous falsehood of all. If you go back 25 years, Al Gore was promoting the same claim that all scientists agreed before we even had a climate debate. And what happens is once you start looking at the 97% claims, we find out that they're quite literally pulled from thin air, in the words of one of the top United Nations scientists, Dr. Richard Toll. Or we find out that they're not even 97 scientists. One of the surveys was only 77 scientists, and they were anonymous scientists. And this is how they create a myth. It's a talking point designed so you don't have to think. All scientists agree. 4 out of 5 dentists recommend this toothpaste. Why wouldn't I buy that toothpaste? Why wouldn't I believe in climate change? The other myth is that we're in the unprecedented hottest year, hottest decade. The Earth is at a boiling point. These hottest year claims are merely political statements, that they're within the margin of error between hottest year statements. And then the most outrageous myth of all is that carbon dioxide is somehow the control knob of the climate. I point out in the book with Ivy League geologists, Nobel Prize winning scientists, that we've had ice ages with higher CO2 levels. That CO2 is not in any way, shape, or form controlling the climate, that there are quite literally hundreds of factors, from ocean cycles to tilts of the Earth's axis to clouds, water vapor, volcanoes, and solar cycles, that they do not control. CO2 alone does not control the climate. It is one of these factors that get essentially drowned out, and you can't distinguish its effect from natural variability.
Despite our problems tonight with the technical things that are going on in the background, I just hope that Dr. Grady, you could hear and see that clip.
Well, yes, I could. And of course, I've said exactly the same thing. And in my presentations, including one that we taped with Revelation TV, I pointed out there's absolutely no such thing as consensus about global warming or global cooling going on. Scientists are on all different viewpoints here. But the worst kind of science that one can practice is called consensus science. Consensus science always gets it wrong. After all, there was a consensus at one time that mice spontaneously generated from a pile of rotting rags. That was consensus at one time. Now, when we take a look at studies that have been done in the past, for instance, I have one right in front of me at the moment, as a matter of fact. It was done back in 2007, admittedly, but that was at a time when we were still just past the peak of a warming trend, where it said that 7% of scientists said it was true, 7% said it wasn't, 50% were talking about no effect of humans on climate whatsoever. Only one scientist out of this whole group of 528 even said that it was catastrophic. Mm. So the public is being totally misinformed. They're being propagandized by the far left concerning this.
Dr. Grady, I'm going to go through a series of short clips again, and hopefully you'll be able to hear those so you can comment on them. We also want to open up the emails and text to our viewers as well. It is important that we hear from you as well and what your views are, and we'll deal with those throughout the program. Let's go to clip number 1, as we called it, The Great Global Warming Swindle, which was first broadcast in 2007 on Channel 4. Let's have a listen to this.
When people say we don't believe in global warming, I say, no, I believe in global warming. I don't believe that human CO2 is causing that warming.
A few years ago, if you would ask me, I would tell you it's CO2. Why? Because just like everyone else in the public, I listened to what the media had to say.
Each day, the news reports grow more fantastically apocalyptic. Politicians no longer dare to express any doubt about climate change.
There is such intolerance of any dissenting voice.
Are some of the worst climate criminals on the planet.
This is the most politically incorrect thing possible, is to doubt this climate change orthodoxy.
Global warming has gone beyond politics. It is a new kind of morality.
Now, the Prime Minister's back from his holidays, unrepentant and unembarrassed about yet another long-haul destination.
Yet, as the frenzy over man-made global warming grows shriller, many senior climate scientists say the actual scientific basis for the theory is crumbling.
There were periods, for example, in Earth's history when we had 3 times as much CO2 as we have today, or periods when we had 10 times as much CO2 as we have today. And if CO2 has a large effect on climate, then you should see it in the temperature reconstruction.
If we look at climate through the geological time frame, we would never suspect CO2 as a major climate driver.
None of the major climate changes in the last 1,000 years can be explained by CO2.
We can't say that CO2 will drive climate. It certainly never did in the past.
I've often heard it said that there is a consensus of thousands of scientists on the global warming issue and that humans are causing a catastrophic change to the climate system. Well, I am one scientist, and there are many that simply think that is not true.
Man-made global warming is no ordinary scientific theory.
This morning, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change made up of...
It is presented in the media as having the stamp of authority of an impressive international organization.
From the IPCC,
the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC.
The IPCC, like any UN body, is political. The final conclusions are politically driven.
This claim that the IPCC is the world's top 1,500 or 2,500 scientists. You look at the bibliographies of the people and it's simply not true. There are quite a number of non-scientists.
And to build the number up to 2,500, they have to start taking reviewers and government people and so on, anyone who ever came close to them. And none of them are asked to agree. Many of them disagree.
Those people who are specialists but don't agree with the polemic and resign, and there have been a number that I know of, they are simply put on the author list and become part of this 2,500 of the world's top scientists.
People have decided you have to convince other people that since no scientist disagrees, you shouldn't disagree either. But that, whenever you hear that in science, that's pure propaganda.
This is a story.
I just want to read a few points out here, Dr. Grady, for you to hear and also for our viewers. Climate scientists need there to be a problem to be able to get funding. This is something which, when you look at the stats, apparently there was something like £170 million only going towards. $170 million going to, per year going to this particular problem. But as soon as everybody started to kick up about it, that soon rose to $2 billion a year. So funding is obviously something which you've spoken about many times, isn't it?
Well, yes, as I said, follow the money, because the emphasis on these left-wing scientists and politicians who are promoting this, it's follow the money. It's a way of getting funding. It's one of the things that I lament about science, that science is no longer the search for truth. Science is today the search for the next grant, and that's how you get it, is you create a problem, then you get funding. I would also like to point out something that I just put up in front of me on the screen in my home that came from the Hadley Center at Met, Exeter, UK, December 2005, pointing out that it was warmer in Greenland in 1928 than it is today. And that came from the very same global warming, terrorists, as I like to talk about them, environmental terrorists. They're promoting this global warming trend today. And yet they put out this information showing that it was warmer in the late 20s than it is today in Greenland.
Right. Well, we'll be looking at that in the graphs later on in the program. But obviously, tens of thousands of jobs are now involved in the global warming project, can we call it that? And that is something which needs to be continually funded, and it seems to be growing. Let me just say that it'd be probably good right now to go to another clip, which is taken from this great global swindle video that we had to split up into parts, and it talks about the jobs as well. So let's have a look at that next.
Climate scientists need there to be a problem in order to get funding.
We have a vested interest in creating panic, because then money will flow to climate science.
There's one thing you shouldn't say, and that is, this might not be a problem.
It is the story of how a political campaign turned into a bureaucratic bandwagon.
Fact of the matter is that tens of thousands of jobs depend upon global warming right now. It's a big business.
It's become a great industry in itself. And if the whole global warming farrago collapsed, there'd be an awful lot of people out of jobs and looking for work.
This is a story of censorship and intimidation.
I have seen and heard there spitting fury at anybody who might disagree with them, which is not the scientific way.
It is a story about Westerners invoking the threat of climatic disaster to hinder vital industrial progress in the developing world.
One clear thing that emerges from the whole environmental debate is the point that there's somebody keen to kill the African dream, and the African dream is to develop.
The environmental movement has evolved into the strongest force there is for preventing development in the developing countries.
Yes, so Grady, there's a few points in that which, again, you've always spoken of over the years. The West, particularly, has been a bit selfish, is it not? Because it's had its industrialization for over 100 years, and now the developing world would like to be a part of that, and we're more or less saying, no, you can't.
The fact of the matter is, we have actually been much healthier when you're wealthier. I know that sounds perhaps a little harsh, but the fact of the matter is, when nations are doing well economically, they can then do the things that are necessary to keep the environment in good shape, such as lowering pollution. What has happened with all of these far-left agendas, Paris, Poland, and so forth, is stifling Western development in Europe and in the Americas in order to allow pollution at rampant levels in India and in China. They're burning low-quality coals, high sulfur. They are polluting like crazy. All you have to do is remember what happened during the Summer Games in Beijing when they had to close down half the traffic every other day because of air pollution problems. They had smog like crazy in China. The fact of the matter is, they're not at all concerned about pollution. They're simply concerned about trying to have economic development without any limits on pollution.
Okay, now I'm going to deal with some of the emails and texts that are coming in from the viewers. And let me just remind you, this is live. It is Monday night, and it is the late show. So we do want to hear from you live at revelationtv.com, and the text number on the screen, 077-8147-2847. Just make it short, not long, and keep it on the topic which we're talking about tonight, which is that start warning that was given by Sir David Attenborough at the climate change summit in Poland today, where he said mankind could disappear soon. First of all, Eddie writes in. Eddie says, have you got a PhD in any of the sciences? Skeptics are coming in already.
Okay, yes, but what's the difference? If I had a high school education, it still wouldn't change the facts.
But yeah, so do you have a PhD? That's what he's asking, in any of the sciences.
I've got 2 doctorates, whoever this is.
Right.
That's not the issue. The issue is, what are the facts? What is the truth? That's what we're after. To ask anything about education is simply an ad hominem attack on anybody.
Yeah, especially me.
What about the facts? What about the truth? What about the solid science that proves that, for instance, hurricane levels are going down for various reasons?
Yeah.
What about all the other truth? The fact that it has been much warmer in the past than it is today, during the Minoan warm period, during the Roman warm period, during the medieval warm period. It was much warmer on the Earth than today, and that was prior to any industrial development we think of since roughly 1760.
Well, let's go to our next email, which is coming from David from Charlbury. Says that Dr. Grady says it's all lies from socialist Labour and Liberal, but even the Tories are claiming that we have a problem with the climate, rising sea levels, etc. Is he now saying that the Tories are turning into socialists?
I'm not here to talk about Tories versus Labour. That's not the issue. The fact of the matter is, even conservatives can be deceived. That's important. The fact of the matter is, ocean levels are not rising. That's, again, a total fabrication. For instance, in Al Gore's movie, he showed islands being evacuated in the Pacific. The truth of the matter is, there's never been an island evacuated in the Pacific or the Indian Ocean because of rising water levels. The fact of the matter is, and again, this is done with a computer, not data, if the Earth were warming, then ocean levels would probably rise, because as the Earth gets cooler, we store more of the water as ice in the polar ice caps and the glaciers. If it was actually warming, then we might be adding water to sea level. The second part of that is that water is added to the oceans every single year at about a cubic mile per year through what's called juvenile water, through volcanic activity, bringing new water to the surface every year. It's not enough to change ocean level. A cubic mile per year is nothing when you're talking about 340 million cubic miles of water roughly in the oceans.
This next email comes in from Marcus, who says, what is Satan's agenda for us believing in man-made global warming?
Well, it's very simple. To try to get your mind off of God as the provider, as the creator. After all, God put the weather and climate into effect. He put the various attributes of it, shall we say, into effect. But when you think that man can change the weather, then you've eliminated God, and that then takes people into an atheistic view. It makes us nothing but thinking animals. It makes us think that we as individuals cannot make a change, and that only government can do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another question here. Is there going to be another ice age, and what is a firmament?
Well, the firmament has to do with biblical terminology, but the word firmament basically has to do with, for instance, in Genesis chapter 1, God called the dry land, the surface of the earth, the dry land surface, the firmament, or the expanse, but it's simply the surface of the earth. Now, the other part of the question, how did he phrase it?
Is there going to be another ice age?
Oh, I'm sorry. The fact of the matter is we don't know. I mean, that's the absolutely correct answer. We've had two what are called dark ages, which were really minor ice ages between the Roman period and the medieval period. That's why it's called the Dark Ages. There were two. We had a longer, deeper little ice age between roughly 1300 and 1900. And it is quite possible that we could have another little ice age. But we're not going to have a major ice age.
Did we lose you? We just lost Dr. Crady. Okay, let me just talk about this third clip that we're going to be showing, number 3 here on my list, which is probably the fourth one anyway. But the history of climate, hot and cold, again taken from the great global warming swindle that we are taking all these clips from. It's basically talking about different aspects of this. 2005, the House of Lords inquiry was set up to examine the scientific evidence of man-made global warming. Lord Lawson also features in this as well. But let's have a look at this clip, and we'll come back to Dr. Crady, hopefully.
In 2005, a House of Lords inquiry was set up to examine the scientific evidence of man-made global warming. A leading figure in that inquiry was Lord Lawson of Blaby, who, as Chancellor of the Exchequer in the 1980s, was the first politician to commit government money to global warming research.
We had a very, very thorough inquiry, took evidence from a whole lot of people expert in this area and produced a report. What surprised me was to discover how weak and uncertain the science was. In fact, there are more and more thoughtful people, some of them a little bit frightened to come out in the open, but who quietly, privately, and some of them publicly, are saying, hang on, wait a minute, this simply doesn't add up.
We are told that the Earth's climate is changing. But the Earth's climate is always changing. In Earth's long history, there have been countless periods when it was much warmer and much cooler than it is today, when much of the world was covered by tropical forests or else vast ice sheets. The climate has always changed, and changed without any help from us humans. We can trace the present warming trend back at least 200 years, to the end of a very cold period in Earth's history. This cold spell is known to climatologists as the Little Ice Age.
Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. It doesn't show signs of stopping.
In the 14th century, Europe plunged into the Little Ice Age. And where we would look for evidence of this are the old illustrations and prints and pictures of Old Father Thames, because during the hardest and toughest winters of that little ice age, the Thames would freeze over. And there were wonderful ice fairs held on the Thames, skating and people actually selling things on the ice.
If we look back further in time, before the Little Ice Age, we find a balmy golden era when temperatures were higher than they are today, a time known to climatologists as the medieval warm period.
It's important that people know that climate enabled a quite different lifestyle in the medieval period. We have this view today that warming is going to have apocalyptic outcomes. In fact, wherever you describe this warm period, it appears to be associated with riches.
We're having a heat wave.
In Europe, this was the great age of the cathedral builders, a time when, according to Chaucer, vineyards flourished even in the north of England.
All over the city of London, there are little memories of the vineyards that grew in the medieval warm period. So this was a wonderfully rich time. And this little church, in a sense, symbolizes it, because it comes from a period of great wealth.
Going back in time further still, before the medieval warm period, we find more warm spells, including a very prolonged period during the Bronze Age, known to geologists as the Holocene maximum, when temperatures were significantly higher than they are now for more than 3 millennia.
If we go back 8,000 years in the Holocene period, our current interglacial, it was much warmer than it is today. Now, the polar bears obviously survived that period. They're with us today. They are very adaptable, and these warm periods in the past, what we call hypsithermals, pose no problem for them.
Okay, hopefully we've got Dr. Grady back with us.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. No doubt you wouldn't have seen that particular clip, but it was talking about the warm periods, which you've talked about many, many times in the past, Dr. Grady, that are historical records of great warmer periods where we had the grapevines and the wine, no doubt, in the northern parts of England, at certain parts in the medieval period, and so many others. And you mentioned going back even further, you know, to the Minoan period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mentioned the Minoan warm period. But the fact of the matter is, every time the Earth has been warmer than today, it has been beneficial. Crops have been grown further north and further south. Remember South America and Africa as well. But crops grow at higher latitudes, longitudes, and so forth in both hemispheres. We have people where you have the Pax Romana occurred during a warm period. The Renaissance is during basically starts with a warm period. The fact of the matter is, it's always been better when it's been warmer than today. The fact of the matter is, though I would regret it personally, we'd all be better off if the Earth was warmer.
Right. Also, let me just go to some of the emails and texts that are coming in, Dr. Grady, because it's a combination of yourself and what our viewers are saying as well. It says, Dr. Grady, Sir David Attenborough has just given a speech blaming man for global warming. If you were to meet him, what would you say to him, says John?
Oh, dear. Well, I would try to be polite with Sir David. After all, he's an older man. The fact of the matter is, he's totally deceived, and he's deceiving everybody else right along with him. He's simply espousing his personal religion. You know, he's an absolute devout atheist evolutionist. And he is simply espousing a propagandized version of what he wants people to believe.
But what would you say to him?
Not true. Well, I would start by simply saying that, Sir David, what you've been espousing is not true, and here are the facts. Now, you need to change your mind to match the facts instead of your political agenda, your personal religion.
If you've got about 30 seconds to get his attention, which question or which fact would you give him first?
Well, in terms of his evolution or in terms of his global warming? I mean, there are different issues.
Stay with the global warming first, then.
In terms of global warming, first of all, the fact that it has been better on the Earth when it's been hotter.
and that's it?
Well, people have done exactly what people always do and should do whenever it gets hotter or colder, which is people have adapted.
And to take advantage of it.
And you should take advantage of it, make the best of what you get. You know, make lemons if you got lemonade. The fact of the matter is that people adapt. People do quite well. It doesn't matter whether it gets hotter or colder. We learn to adapt. Now, yes, we are better off when it's warmer than when it's cooler because we can grow crops more extensively.
What would you say to the people living in California and other parts of the world that, like even Australia, having terrible fires that are being caused because of the extreme heat?
But much of those fires aren't due to the heat. Much of those fires are due to the mismanagement by evolutionists, by environmental terrorists, such as in California, where they have not allowed proper management of the resources, and therefore these fires got totally out of control. And that's human problem, not natural problem.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, we don't want to have the climate or the weather stop. First of all, whose weather do you want to adapt? I don't know about you. I don't want the weather of the Sahara. Secondly, if weather and climate didn't change, that would be unnatural. That would be bad, not good.
Reverend Joe writes in, and I've also got some written information which might be helpful here as well, Dr. Grady, but let me just read you what he says. Excuse me from slurping a bit. It's just I had some work done on my teeth. Okay. I thought elementary science taught us that man breathed out carbon dioxide and plants breathed in carbon dioxide, which should be the natural order. So what happened to this theory?
Well, first of all, there's nothing. It's not a theory. That's a fact. Now, let me go back to carbon dioxide for a second. Yes, if you take an atmosphere that has no carbon dioxide in it whatsoever and you add 10 parts per million, you will get an immediate slight warming effect. But as you add carbon dioxide to an atmosphere, doesn't matter how much you add, eventually you reach a point where there's no additional warming. Now, we are long past that. The fact of the matter is, right now, we could dump carbon dioxide into the environment. It wouldn't change a thing. Actually, the plants would love it. After all, think about this. When these environmental terrorists are trying to sequester carbon dioxide, the unfortunate part of it is they are starving millions of people to death around the world because plants use carbon dioxide to make food. If you lower the amount of carbon dioxide, you will lower the amount of food production. The same thing is also true about, for instance, wood to build structures. Trees use carbon dioxide. If we sequester carbon dioxide, there's less timber to make structures, there's less food to eat. It's exactly, always 180 degrees the wrong solution when it comes to these people.
Well, these people, as you call them, you know, we've had these ice ages in the past, as we know, with higher CO2 levels than we have now, right?
Well, first of all, we've only had one true ice age in the past. Now, we have had what are called little ice ages or dark ages. That's a euphemism for a little mini ice age kind of a condition. It simply means the temperature for a long time stayed below average. That's all it means. The fact of the matter is that there's only been one ice age in the past. Now, of course, from a biblical standpoint, it occurred after the flood of Noah. It lasted approximately 700 years. It really wasn't that big a deal to begin with, as I have shown in presentations with RTV. The rest of it are just natural fluctuations, natural cycles that go on.
Okay, let me understand this, and the viewers, if they're a little bit like me, not quite getting this, but the problem seems to be with the high levels of CO2. Is that right?
They are trying to get you to believe that, but it's not true.
Right.
Now, the graph that you just threw up, and I meant that you just put on the screen, that graph, look at it very carefully. When you say, oh, look at all that red on the right, oh, look at how high it is, and so forth. And then take a look at the left for just a second, and you'll notice it's an exaggeration. What they've done is they've picked a scale that makes it look catastrophic on the right-hand side. But when you take a look at the left-hand side and realize you're talking about 0.2 of a difference of a degree, suddenly you realize, well, wait a minute, that's nothing.
Right, it isn't, is it really?
You see, what they've done is they've exaggerated the scale to sell you on the idea that it's catastrophic. But if you take a look at that scale and you were to correct the scale to something reasonable, all of a sudden you realize it's a minor fluctuation along a mean. That's all it is.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's look at some of the emails and texts that are coming in from our viewers. It makes me so angry, writes Marilyn from North Wales, it makes me so angry when people like David Attenborough, whose program we love, by the way, think it's because, or us humans, that there is global warming. The arrogance of them to think we are responsible and can do anything about it, and blaming our carbon footprint. If we reduce it to nothing, we will die. We need carbon to live. Everything should be in balance, but they go over the top and scaremonger, says Marilyn.
Absolutely right, Marilyn. Very good for you. And let's take a look at just how much scaremongering there is. There have been reports, and I'm sure you know better than I do, in the UK, of women aborting their babies to reduce their carbon footprint. That is absolute insanity.
Another email. Sorry, Grady, I know about technical problems tonight. I apologise to our viewers. Dermot writes in from County Wicklow in Ireland. It says, is not this climate change simply a drive towards global rule in preparation for the Antichrist?
Oh, it's a push towards one world government, of course.
Absolutely.
But that's man government, not God's government.
Mm-hmm. Ivan writes in and says, David Attenborough considers himself to be an agnostic, and he strongly opposes creationism and supports the evolutionary theory. And as far as I'm concerned, says Ivan, if somebody thinks that God's scripture is wrong, that sounds more like an atheist to me. Personally, I agree with Dr. Grady's analysis 100%.
Why, thank you.
Next one from Gordon says, about 50 years ago, I seem to remember the seasons God put in place, where, as he said, every Christmas we had snow, and spring we got April showers, and summer lasted all of our school holidays. But now we've no guarantee of anything like it. It's all gone to pot, says Gordon.
Well, again, we need to take a look at what's really going on. The Earth is slowly, very slowly cooling because we radiate more heat every day than we get from the sun. That's number one. Number two, volcanic activity is increasing as the Bible prophesied, and there's good reasons for that in the natural secular realm to agree with. And volcanic activity always cools the Earth. Number three, sunspot activity. Now, we are at a solar minimum at the moment. And the last two solar cycles have been lower and lower, each one, very reminiscent of what occurred in England, for instance, and the world, of course. But between 1800 and 1830, we had two very low solar cycles, very much like the one we just completed, or are in the process of completing. And when we go back to 1650 to 1700, we had almost no sunspots for 50 years. And that was the bottom of the Little Ice Age.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so there are natural things that are occurring, and they often add to each other. So if you have, as we have now, the solar sunspots going down, and we had volcanic activity, it doubles up. But when, hopefully, sunspot activity will start to increase again soon, that's a hope, we don't know. And if we had a lack of volcanic activity, the Earth would warm up. Again, this is not significant in the sense of many degrees, but it would start to warm back up a little bit.
Here's one for you, Dr. Grady, on this global warming issue, writes Christopher. Seeing as we have atmospheric records dating back millions of years from ice core drilling, and it proves that there is exponentially more CO2 in our atmosphere than has been for the whole history of the Earth obtained from these ice cores. The fact that Venus is the hottest planet in our solar system, even though it's further away from the sun than Mercury, proving the effect of greenhouse gases in an atmosphere. How can we ignore these irrefutable proofs of large quantities of CO2 being a problematic issue for climate change? Question mark.
Well, first of all, you want to talk about the ice cores, you're absolutely dead wrong. That's not millions and millions of years of information. The fact of the matter is that the lines we see on the polar ice cores are not years, they are simply individual storms. We now know from modern research that the entire axe cap in the north or the south could be formed in only 3,000 years.
Right.
So that information that you're trying to extrapolate over millions of years is simply bogus.
Yeah, well, I see why there would be two different of opinion there. So Chris wants to write back on what Dr. Grady said. I'll be happy to pick that up if we can before the end of the programme. Dear Grady, why talk about the left or the right wing? Who keeps the 613 precepts of the law of Moses, left or right? Cheers to you both, says Michael.
We won't talk about the morality of the whole thing. What we're going to talk about is the fact that God set these things into motion. And there's roughly 36 verses of the Bible where God says he's in charge of the weather and we can't change it no matter what we do. That he has put things in nature that balance things out, who counteract each other. Right. Now, for instance, seasons will not cease. Genesis 8:22. God can use the weather to chastise or to punish. Amos 4:7. There are literally dozens of verses where God's in charge of the weather. We can't change it.
Jill writes in, and I'm just looking this scripture up, Luke 21, very interesting. It is something that has caught my eye a few times, especially in recent years, what's happening out there. It talks about, this is in 21 verse 25, it says, there will be signs in the sun and the moon and stars, and on the earth dismay amongst the nations, in perplexity at the roaring of the sea and the waves, men fainting from fear and expectation of the things which are coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in the cloud with great glory. So it is talking about a time when there would be such a turmoil to cause, if you like, such giant waves that would be part and parcel of when we see Christ return. I don't know whether you want to comment on that, because I know you don't do with eschatology, but you know, we to expect some of these sort of things that we see, great signs and wonders in the heavens and the earth?
Well, yes, and that's because of human sin in the garden, which then ruined a perfect creation, a perfect universe. Remember that the entire universe was perfect. And just one sin is enough to make the entire universe imperfect. Things are going downhill. They are deteriorating fast. The second law of thermodynamics in physics. But what is happening is there's going to be more and more earthquakes. There's going to be more and more volcanoes, simply because, as Howard and I will both attest, the older you get, the more cracked up you are.
Thank you.
And the earth cannot heal itself. Therefore, what happens? As the cracks put stresses on the surface in other areas, we're going to get more and more and more earthquakes. Take a look at what just happened in Alaska, for instance. With a 7.0 and 500 minor tremors along with it.
So we are to expect not only just these things which the world is talking about now and identifying as problematic, to say the least, but Christ prophesied, and the scriptures long before Christ actually came to this earth point to the times that even in Numbers chapter 12 and verse 6 says, Fiona, that the end of this age will, I suppose, will come all these sort of problems that we're having, upheaval, she says, but they were prophesied thousands of years ago, and we are to expect this sort of activity, which is, I suppose, the onset of Armageddon. People use these biblical terms quite a lot in the news these days. I don't know whether they do it in America, Dr. Grady, but they certainly do, of biblical proportions, the things that are happening, they say. But anyway, let me carry on, because we're running out of time. Some of the things that we could also think about is items that were only available to the rich previously are now able to be enjoyed by all of us. So because of the industrialization, we're living at a very wealthy time, as we say, for us in the West, but those that are now going to be missing out for their chance to climb out of poverty, particularly in developing countries. So, and then there's the government funding issue, that the more they cry about it, the more money they get, the money that it first started only attracting $170 million a year for this sort of problem that they're having to deal with, but now they're getting billions a year in funding, and it's all coming from taxes and obviously other effects. We're having to change our cars to become electric, and so it's going to create a lot more wealth. What do you think of Donald Trump's position, which he's said recently? Let's watch this video first, and then I'd like you to comment on that.
I think something's happening, something's changing, and it'll change back again. I don't think it's a hoax. I think there's probably a difference, but I don't know that it's man-made. I will say this. I don't want to give trillions and trillions of dollars. I don't want to lose millions and millions of jobs.
So a very short clip there, Dr. Grady. Really, Trump's position, he doesn't necessarily call it a hoax, but he's certainly not being deceived, as a lot of people are, into thinking that and making rash decisions to put at risk hundreds of thousands of jobs.
And again, I think that Trump was very cogent. I think he's dead on the money. Of course, I think it's far more of a hoax than he does, but in terms of economic development, he's absolutely correct. Now, we shouldn't pollute for the sake of pollution, but we're allowing people to pollute heavily in India, in China, in high population areas, burning low-quality fuels, but trying to restrict the industrial world, which lifts the rest of the world up. When things are going good in Europe, when things are going good in North America and in parts of South America, the world benefits all over. And yet these people are trying to hurt the good, and supposedly they're benefiting the bad. Well, that's a double-minded position as far as I'm concerned. That's the book of James right there.
Right. We keep hearing, says Maggie, these days various temperatures, weather patterns are breaking records. How long have we been keeping these records? I believe that it's not very long. And we can see, though, that we have records that go back further than what we call the modern records. Since records began, we keep hearing this, but they don't go back far enough, as I would say, and probably Maggie.
And Maggie, it's an excellent, excellent point. When somebody says, oh, it's the hottest it's been on record, exactly right. Whose record? How long are we talking about? Think about it. We've only had accurate records of the number of hurricanes in the Atlantic since 1850. So when you say, oh, it's the most or the least, well, only since 1850. We don't know whether it was more or less before that, because the only thing we have are a few anecdotal comments about these things. We have no measurements. The same thing has to do with temperatures. Now, you know, when was the thermometer invented? When was the barometer invented? Then what about before that? How do we know what the climates were? What we have are written records of anecdotal nature. We have art, such as in the Dark Ages, the clouds and doom and gloom outside of the windows that the artists were painting versus the bright sunlight that they were doing early in the Renaissance. We also have crop records of when were they growing crops, such as in England. Vines were being grown at Hadrian's Wall during the Roman warm period. We also have very meticulous measurements of the depth of the Nile River, because the Egyptians kept meticulous records for thousands of years on the depth of the Nile spring floods. That tells us what was happening upriver into central and south portions of Africa concerning rainfalls, hot and cold temperatures based on the level of the water. You can actually figure out what the climates were like back 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago.
Okay, we're getting to the end of the program, Dr. Grady. Just looking at my notes, there's so much more we could cover, but let me just read a few of these notes that I've got here that we did earlier. NAPSA, one of the fundamental tenets of our justice system is that innocent until proven guilty. And while that doesn't apply to scientific discovery in the global warming debate, the prevailing attitude is that human-induced global warming is already a fact of life, and it is up to the doubters to prove otherwise. Well, to complete the analogy, I'll add that to date, there is no credible evidence to demonstrate that the climatological changes we've seen since the 1800s are outside the bounds of natural variability inherent in the Earth's climate system. Talks about also carbon dioxide is not a pollutant, as many claim. Carbon dioxide is good for plant life and is a natural constituent of the atmosphere. And the Earth's got a long history. There's been more and less carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than we see today. There's just so much information out there if you want to go for it, instead of just listening to what is being fed to us at the moment. What again do you think, Grady, is the political agenda? Is it to control mankind? Is it to put the fear of God? Well, they don't believe in God. Or no. What is it?
It is to put fear into people, to promote statism. To promote communism.
Sorry?
Statism.
All right.
To promote communism, to promote socialism. The communist elitists want to control people by fear-mongering that you can't do this, you can't change it, but it's a big, big problem that only government can handle. It's simply not true. Government cannot handle the problem because there's no problem to handle. Now, I don't believe in pollution for any purposes that's not for a useful thing. You know, I don't believe in burning carbon just to burn carbon. But we can burn carbon cleanly. Plants would love it. We'd have more food on the earth, more trees on the earth if we were burning more carbon, as long as it's for a useful purpose. So we don't want to pollute, but we do want to burn these things for useful purposes as wise stewards for the benefit of all mankind around the earth, that lifts everybody up through industrial productivity, through technological development, but not simply pollute for the sake of pollution.
Right, thank you. Let me just we do have some lovely people out there who love Revelation TV, and we do have one or two that actually can't stand us. But so all the money you raised in the new studios, for the new studios, was wasted because Rev TV is still an amateur outfit. Let me tell you, this is a Tuppence Halfpenny studio here that we're working from in the UK. The new studio, which is being built, is still not going to be finished, probably for another 9 months to a year, where we have all the equipment that ITV sold us, and it's all the top of the range stuff. We don't have access to that at the moment because we don't have our new studios. But it's really nice of you to write so lovely that we're still an amateur outfit. We're doing our best with such a probably our annual budget is what is spent per hour by ITV or the BBC. I think we do extremely well. And the most important thing is content is king. Your picture is, as much as it gets up my nose, is not always good, or our sound and our problems that we're having. But there's two people here. Maybe actually, I lied, there's 3 people here. And the BBC and the ITV will have 300 on a shift at least, or Sky News. So, you know, we're doing the best we can. But obviously, it's not so much that we're an amateur outfit and we're not professionals. It's the fact that we're the voice of the living God, giving an information to a divine, through a divine source to you, the viewer. In fact, when I was first given Revelation as a title for the program, or the name of the channel even, it went further, I looked it up in the dictionary. It said that this was, the meaning of Revelation is a delivery of a message from a divine source that becomes a revelation or an understanding that they didn't have before, which is of higher use to you eventually than anything to do with all the things that we get embroiled with in everyday life. Jesus Christ is coming back. He's coming back. He's going to separate the sheep from the goats. And I just hope that you're not a goat, and I'm not kidding, okay? So anyway, Dr. Grady, thank you for being with us on our amateur outfit. But we don't have the millions that they have, do they?
I'm no amateur, and neither are you.
Okay.
The fact of the matter is, you don't determine truth by voting.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we're out of time, and sounds like a song that I used to know. But let me just say, get into the Word of God. Make use of it while you can. Get into an understanding what is going to be coming upon us as the days go more and more wicked. God bless you. Thank you very much, Dr. Grady, and all of you at home for writing in. Take care. Good night.